Unlock the door to God's unconditional grace. Grace is the unmerited and undeserved favor of God. It is a gift given freely and without condition. It is a blessing that comes from a loving and forgiving God, who is always ready to offer mercy and love to all who are willing to accept it. God's unconditional grace is not something that can be bought or earned. It is a gift that is freely given.
What is God's unconditional grace? God's unconditional grace is the result of His unconditional love for us. It is a blessing that comes from the depths of His heart and is given without any expectation of anything in return. This grace is not based on any condition or requirement, rather, it is a gift that comes freely and without any strings attached. Grace is not something that is given only to those who are deserving, rather it is a gift that is available to all who are willing to accept it. God's grace is a source of strength and hope in times of difficulty and despair. It is a way for us to draw closer to God and to experience His presence in our lives. It is a reminder that God is always there, watching over us and providing us with the love and support we need to make it through the toughest of times. God's grace is a source of comfort, peace, and joy in our lives. It is a reminder that God is always with us, even when we feel alone or lost. It is a way for us to experience the unconditional love of God and to be reminded of His mercy and grace.
How to recognize God's grace in our lives. God's grace is all around us, and it is often hard to recognize. It is not always obvious, but it is there. We can recognize God's grace in our lives by paying attention to the small things that bring us joy and comfort. We can also recognize it in the moments of peace and calm that come when we least expect it. We can also recognize God's grace in our everyday experiences. The simple act of making a cup of tea or a meal for a loved one can be a way of experiencing God's grace. We can also recognize it in the beauty of nature, in the kindness of strangers, and in the joy of a good conversation.
How to accept and embrace God's grace. Accepting and embracing God's grace can be a challenge, especially if we are feeling lost or hopeless. The first step is to open our hearts and minds to the presence of God. We can do this by taking time each day to pray, meditate, and reflect on the love and grace of God. The next step is to practice gratitude. We can begin to recognize the blessings of God's grace in our lives. We can be thankful for the small moments of peace and joy and the simple pleasures of life. We can be grateful for the love and support of family and friends. Finally, we can take steps to live in a way that is consistent with God's grace. We can practice forgiveness and acceptance of others, even when they have wronged us. We can choose to be kind and generous with our words and actions. We can strive to live a life of love and service.
How to use God's grace to live a better life. Living a life of grace is a way to honor God and to show our gratitude for His unconditional love. When we live with grace, we become more aware of God's presence in our lives and more connected to the people and things around us. We become more mindful of our words and actions and more in tune with our emotions and feelings. Living a life of grace also helps us to become more compassionate and understanding of others. We become more willing to forgive and accept people for who they are. We also become more patient and understanding of our own mistakes and shortcomings. Finally, living a life of grace helps us to live a life of service. We become more aware of the needs of others and more committed to helping those in need. We become more willing to go out of our way to serve and to make a difference in the lives of those around us.
Benefits of living with God's grace. Living with God's grace can bring a number of benefits to our lives. It can help us to become more mindful of our words and actions and more aware of the needs of those around us. We can be more compassionate and understanding of others and more forgiving and accepting of ourselves. Living with God's grace can also help us to become more connected to God and more in tune with His presence in our lives. We can be more open to experiencing His love and mercy and more mindful of His grace. Finally, living with God's grace can help us to become more committed to living a life of service. We can be more willing to go out of our way to help others and more open to making a difference in the lives of those around us.
How to spread the message of God's grace. We can spread the message of God's grace by sharing our stories and experiences of His love and mercy. We can tell others about the blessings of His grace and how it has helped us in our lives. We can also talk to others about our faith and how it has helped us to become more mindful of God's presence in our lives. We can also spread the message of God's grace by being examples of His love and mercy. We can practice kindness and generosity in our words and actions. We can be patient and understanding of others and be willing to forgive and accept those who have wronged us. Finally, we can spread the message of God's grace by living a life of service. We can seek out opportunities to make a difference in the lives of those around us. We can volunteer our time and energy to help those in need and reach out to our neighbors with kindness and compassion.
God's unconditional grace is a powerful and transformative force in our lives. It is a reminder of God's unconditional love and mercy and a source of strength and hope in times of difficulty and despair. It is a way for us to experience the presence of God and to be reminded of His grace. God's grace is available to all who are willing to accept it. We can recognize it in our everyday experiences and practice gratitude and kindness in our words and actions. We can also use God's grace to live a better life and to spread the message of His love and mercy to those around us. By embracing God's grace, we can experience the joy and peace that comes from living a life of love and service.